Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Dear/X/, based on sheer probability, I'm probably somewhat like you. I'm a male in my mid-20s. I'm currently lying down in my bed posting from a laptop with a rather annoying head cold, breathing entirely through my mouth. I live in the southeast area of the United States. I'm listening to some music that I enjoy. I work at a decent job that pays me only slightly above minimum wage, and I struggle to make it month to month. There is nothing magical about me. Now then, since we've established that I am not a special snowflake, and hopefully you've related to some aspect of what I said about myself, I need to tell a story and explain a few things to you all. The vast majority of the posters here are role players. The vast majority of people here starting threads about magic, demons, ghosts, aliens, the occult, thelema, paranormal experiences as a whole, are speaking from a standpoint of suspended disbelief and speculation on events that they have not personally witnessed take place. Purely for the sake of conversation, I will use an example. It is akin to how I would describe Buckingham Palace. I've never been to England, or out of the US for that matter, but I know Buckingham Palace exists. I can picture it in my mind's eye, but I've never actually seen the palace. Many of its nuances are just unknowable to me because I've never been there to experience its beauty and depth. This is how most people here are experiencing the paranormal, through their mind's eye, in their imagination, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with creativity, but every once in a while someone comes around these parts that has had first-hand contact with something they can't explain. Some sort of experience that just doesn't quite fit into their worldview, and the memory sits and grows in their brain trying to assimilate, like a square peg trying to enter a round hole. And that, my friends, changes a man. It really does. There is a different vibe, if you will, after someone experiences the paranormal. Everything remains the same outside, but inside something is different. To the general public, these people are normal. But to those who have brushed shoulders with the ethereal, they glow in the dark. I would look like a normal person if you ran into me on the street or came into my job and ordered a cup of coffee. However, if you would know immediately that something was definitely going on. This has been my experience time and time again. Stay with me here. You remember how I related to you in the beginning of this thread? Nothing about that changes. Nothing about that is different. I'm no better or worse or more special or more chosen than you. I am not a messiah or a light being or a vampire or an alien. The only difference between you and I is that I've seen some things in the real world that I can't explain and simply don't have the answers to. I've experienced some things that don't fit in with my concepts or reality or life or anything logical, and they frankly don't make sense in my mind. On nights like these, when I think about those things, they resurface and they won't go away. The square peg tries to force itself through the round hole, but it just doesn't fit. I've done a great deal of trying to forget about these things. It doesn't work, they don't go away. The memories are always there, tugging at the back of my mind and lurking around in my subconscious like specters in the night. This is what this thread is about, and it's high time I spoke about what happened. It's high time I told someone the truth. This is not an Ask Me Anything thread. This is not an attention-seeking thread. This is not a role play. This is me recounting the experiences that took place in my life between 2009 to 2011 as accurately as I can remember them, in the hopes that someone on this board takes what they can from it. For the sake of trying to keep this readable and not a short novel, I will break down the backstory as much as possible into the key points. I will be glad to expand on any part of this later on if anyone feels that it would greatly help their understanding of the story. I will not be greentexting because I feel that it introduces an air of slick irony and detracts from the central point of any story. It's mid-2009. I've just turned 19. I had just gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship with a girl that I was planning to marry. She got increasingly more unstable as time went on until a serious self-termination attempt from her put up red flags for me to leave and get her help. That failed. She is faring rather poorly to this day. This had put me in a near constant state of depression, and I turned to drinking to numb my feelings. As time went on, I became unable to function without liquor daily, and I was subsequently kicked out of college due to being too drunk to make it to class, much less pass any exams. This began a 6-month bender where I was drunk nearly every day, and pretty much living wherever I happened to fall down that night. I was eventually picked up by the police shortly before my 20th birthday for a DUI, amongst other charges. I was given the option of out-of-state rehabilitation in a halfway house, or a mandatory 6 months in jail and a hefty fine. I obviously chose the rehab, and I moved 1,000 miles away from my small hometown, and incidentally anyone who knew me or cared about me, into a strange new frontier in a big city. No, I will not be disclosing locations. It isn't important. I made it through rehab after an absolutely horrible detoxification process, and moved into a halfway house full of the most insane people I've ever met. These people were lunatics, and I mean that in every sense of the word. Living in a halfway house, you learn all kinds of things about humanity. For example, some people do not shower more than once a week. Others cannot leave their home unless they have meticulously groomed every area of their body and are looking fine. More importantly, some people are perfectly content living a lie for their entire lives. It's acceptable to them. I wasn't there long before I met the resident psycho, Jason, pseudonym. Jason was a guy a few years older than me. All of the other residents said he was nuts and involved with a cult, and to stay away from him. But when I finally sat down, Jason didn't sound crazy to me. He glowed in the dark, like I mentioned earlier. The things he said and the way that he lived his life seemed infinitely interesting to me. We grew to be good acquaintances over many late-night cigars and metaphysical conversation. Jason, albeit he did have his quirks, was looking like the least insane person in a 10-mile radius to me. Eventually, he asked me to join him at a meeting of the group he was involved in. I was a bit wary given all the cult talk, but I figured I'd go with him to see what was going on. What followed began the most insane 2 years of my life. If I could have seen the future then and where I would be today and my mental state, I would have taken the 6 months in the slammer and kept slamming back shots afterwards, because I never knew what I was getting myself into, browsing/x/ and wishing I could experience something, anything out of the ordinary. I wish I could go back. I wish I never saw any of it. It's a curse. The meeting was fairly small. It was primarily younger guys. I think the oldest was 33. This is extremely odd, as most AA meetings are populated by significantly older people, 50 plus. I was pretty happy, because being 20 and talking leather-faced old men about trying to get sober really sucked ass. I immediately noticed that I felt better being there. These guys were cool, all with the same aura as Jason, except Jason was the newbie here. Most of them were a year plus in the group, and they were pretty interesting. They spoke with conviction about what they were doing, that they had discovered a foolproof method of sobriety, and that all other meetings were inherently flawed and selfish. I felt the same way because AA is a bunch of bull. I was intrigued. What sold me the most was how happy these people were. I was literally torn apart emotionally and numb to pretty much everything. Since I'd quit drinking, I woke up wanting to die every single day. I wanted the joy these people had, so I was advised to get a sponsor. I eventually asked a guy to sponsor me, personally show me the ropes and help me stay sober. He gave me a set of ritualized instructions and told me to call him tomorrow, and we'd go from there. I noticed that there were pairs of people standing, walking around, sitting all over the place. Nobody was sitting alone or left out. My sponsor explained that these were called one-on-ones, and that if I ever hoped to stay sober, I should get in one. Immediately. So I walked around and found the one person that was alone. He was sitting in the back smoking a cigar and playing a game on his cell phone. I introduced myself and he asked me to sit down and start talking. I started rattling off about my screwed up life and he didn't budge. He looked at me sometime later after I was done and stared right through me. That 1,000-yard stare. He said, "Listen, I know your life sucked. In fact, I know all about you. Your name's Chris. Your parents are still together. You've had a pet die. Even though you manage to date women, you are insecure, and I even know that you probably have a sibling that's better than you. I know this because I've known a million Chris's. The vast majority of them are dead right now. Yeah, all my friends from when I got into AA are dead, in prison, or so drunk they've dropped off the grid except for one. One out of hundreds. If you don't want to end up that way, I suggest you do whatever your sponsor tells you to do or go ahead and blow your brains out right now. Do your family a favor." This went on for about 30 minutes. The thing about this is that he was dead on. He told me the truth and that was terrifying. I've never seen anyone look at me the way he did. He didn't break eye contact for 30 minutes. He pulled out all of the thoughts I was having in that conversation, laid them out before me and dissected them. Explained why they were wrong. I'd never been so out of sorts in my entire life. As I walked away smoking what felt like my millionth cigarette, I must have looked like a ghost. Turns out that guy started the group. Cameron had been sober for more than a decade and had sufficiently put the fear of God into me. My sponsor put me back together, drove me home and reminded me to start the set of directions he had given me, the ritual, in the morning. One thought crossed my mind here. How did he know those things? There's no way it's just from studying people. He was dead on. Either way, I want to do that. Wow. I found out how. To glaze over 8 more posts of explanation, I did the ritual and I went to meetings every single day and night. I was coaxed to move out of my halfway house shortly after Jason did to join him on a senior member's living room floor. Total immersion. By this point, I had been sober for about 6 months. They had explained that the main concept of the group was other-centeredness/service to others, and that the knowledge that I had about staying sober was priceless. They painted me into a corner, and I had no choice but to comply. I had to recruit people or I had no place to stay. I was convinced to drop all contact with my family. I was convinced to cut off my old friends. I was totally immersed in this new lifestyle, which involved more and more esoteric principles and occult ideals, Illuminism, ego destruction, guru worship, gnosis, etc., as time went on. The thing about all of this is that my 20-year-old mind could not take well to it. I had a lot of difficulty in the beginning. I eventually got on the horse, though, after some more hard conditioning. I was subjected to conversations like Cameron had with me the first night every night, and then put back together, effectively painting the group as both nurturer and attacker, fulfilling all of my needs. Elaborate setups to bring me close to a person and then rip them away. I got into a relationship with a girl, and just as things were getting good, Cameron banned all women from the group, not even kidding. Eventually, I broke down and accepted the conditioning, and right here is where things gets into that unexplainable category. I was doing everything. I was doing the ritual, I was recruiting and sponsoring people, and all of a sudden I felt it. I was having a one-on-one with one of the guys I brought in, and boom, there it was. I felt gnosis. I felt the presence of God coursing through my veins and filling my body. It was like a powerful waterfall of pure love, and light was crashing down upon my soul. I wasn't speaking my words anymore. I was somewhere else, reveling in the beauty of this experience. It was like I was floating above myself, watching myself smoke cigarettes and blow this new guy's mind. You should have seen it. I'm this 20-year-old kid sitting across from a 45-year-old heroin addict with a fire in my eyes, talking about things I have no business knowing about his life. He's visibly shaken. He can tell something's up, and he can feel it too. I drifted there listening to words that aren't mine for a while, and when I finally slid back into my body, I stood up shakily and said, "Well, I guess our conversation's over because I'm out of things to say. Call me tomorrow, Richie. I'll pick you up." He just mumbled, "Okay," shook my hand and walked away. It looked like he had just watched me grow a second head. I immediately went to go find my sponsor. I told him about the situation and he just sort of smirked and told me to go find Cameron, interrupt him and have a one-on-one with him. Cameron is like the untouchable top rung of the hierarchy, so I knew this was big news. I usually had no reason to speak to him, and frankly didn't want to since most of our conversations involved him picking apart my brain and freaking me out. So I found Cameron sitting alone, nearly identical to where I found him on the first night I ever came out with Jason. It felt like an eternity ago that I was reluctantly getting into a car with the halfway house's crazy guy. I sat down next to Cameron and asked him if I could talk. I told him what had happened and he stopped what he was doing and just laughed for a bit and looked at me. That eye contact still haunts me to this day. He said, "You felt it on the first night, didn't you? You could tell that something here was off. You could tell that when I was speaking to you and smashing your worldview that something wasn't quite right there. You could feel the presence of something bigger and scarier and infinitely more complex than you could possibly imagine. Like it was sitting right here with us, yet it's as invisible as thin air. And that interested you, did it? You wouldn't be here right now if it didn't." He handed me a cigar. I could tell this was going to be a long talk. In fact, through puffs on his cigar, you can feel that same thing right now, sitting here talking to me. You just had poor Richie more interested than any therapist or drug counselor or social worker ever did, on his second night of sobriety. You really think some 20-year-old punk-ass kid can do that? Heads up, you can't. What you just experienced was what the Buddha referred to as nirvana. You were at the exact right frequency, and you were involved enough in your conversation that your ego was totally out of the way. That's the barrier, if you can dig it. The human condition. We block ourselves off from God and the other side by getting our heads so far up our asses that we can't even see the light of day anymore. The presence of God is a beautiful thing, and you have to really understand something here, Chris, that the world isn't ready to understand that they are the problem. We are, as alcoholics, it's an undeniable fact. We can say that for sure and not even worry about it. The problem is that you've opened a door now, and there's frankly no way of being able to tell what's going to come through. We don't even know how to shut it. There's no telling what you're going to run into. Just hang on for the ride. You've done LSD before, right? Well, life is about to kick acid's ass. As I listened to all this, I was dumbfounded. Partly because of his demeanor. This wasn't about ripping me. This was him talking to me man to man, but it was still horrifying. The implications of this... My God. I listened on as he talked about his experiences. He spoke of 732 being the true numerical skeleton key. He talked about the significance of the number 12. He talked about numerous spiritual principles and laws. He talked about seeing the future and being able to read other people's thoughts, and did it to me as I was sitting there with him. He talked about how his sponsees were in the process of doing the same thing. He told me that he was going to help me hone these abilities, and that I should stick close by Mike, a good friend of mine in the group with roughly the same amount of sobriety time. I was to move into Cameron's living room with Mike that night. We were to rotate between the couch and the floor. Our first night there, we both separately experienced extremely vivid, nearly identical DMT-like hallucinations of malevolent entities, astral projection, and lucid dreaming. We were unaware that one another had done so until the next night at AA when I spoke to him about the experience. Hanging out with Mike, this is all in early mid-2012, was when things went from okay, I'm for sure in a cult, to oh my God, these guys are actually onto something. WTF do I do? We experienced a lot together, always after good nights in AA when the presence of God things would happen. It was March 29th, though, that really stands out. We were watching King of the Hill on late-night TV. We both commented on how strange of an episode it was. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. I don't even remember the storyline now that I'm thinking about it. I remember it was like we were watching a really bad cut episode where there was no transition music and the characters moved in really choppy stop-motion type animation. I remember thinking about 732 since I had been thinking about it a lot, when all of a sudden I felt something in the room, something menacing. I looked over at Mike and he apparently saw it too. We were both clearly shaken. Then it was like we were both peaking on acid out of nowhere. I was hallucinating my balls off, eyes open, not sleeping, along with my friend who verified afterwards that it was in fact a real experience. We were there, as a blooming fractal entity morphed out of the wall, seemingly laughing. It opened its mouth wide and doubled back as if it was eating itself whole. It kept doing this over and over and over, and we were both frozen to the couch. It got so maddeningly close that it was almost touching my face, and oh God, I'm falling into the abyss of that horrible mouth, and what if I never get back, oh shit. And then it all faded out. All of a sudden we were back to normal and nothing was wrong. Except we were both still fully aware of what happened. I was on the verge of tears. Screwed Up, King of the Hill is still playing. I cut the TV off and went outside to smoke. Mike came too, but we didn't really say anything to each other. We both knew that something had happened and it wasn't going to do either of us good talking about it. That kind of thing happened several more times to me, at least. I don't know about Mike. I never mentioned it to Mike anymore. I never mentioned that it kept happening to anybody until right now. Anyways, life goes on. So I'm sponsoring people now and I'm moving on and trying to get them to experience this. And one kid does. He flew halfway across the country the next night and told me to never contact him again. It scared him so bad. Now is probably a good time to mention that the cult recruiting really picked up to like grabbing homeless dudes off the street and self-detoxing them. If you know anything about alcohol detox, then you know that someone who is coming off of the sauce needs to be in a hospital, and someone who has been drinking daily for 20 years and abruptly stops should be dead. Miraculously, no one did. However, several people did leave and drink themselves to death as a result of the cult's extremely intrusive nature. I don't know you've ever had anyone digging around in your mind before without your consent, but it's creepy as hell. Meanwhile, synchronicity in my life is really going off the charts. I can barely go 10 minutes without thinking about something, and then someone brings up the subject, talking about an old friend and having them call out of the blue during the conversation completely unprompted. Dreaming about news stories before they happen. Checking the clock at every single 32 minutes for 12 straight hours unintentionally, etc., etc., etc. And then in July, shit hit the fan. Tensions within the group were at an all-time high. My best friend in the group, Mike, was banned for life for refusing to detox a homeless guy in his house. I was livid. This guy had put in 18 months of non-stop labor and help for the group, and you just tossed him out like last week's trash? Screw that. I got pissed, I got rebellious, and I cursed out a lot of people that night and planned to leave. A week later, my job is gone, my cash is depleted, I'm out of smokes, and I'm ready to self-terminate. So I feel it necessary to describe what my life looked like at this point, and some of the things the cult had done before continuing on with the story. I had learned to do some entry-level thought manipulation with newcomers. I learned a lot about how to make an impression on people and lead them to where I wanted to be. I had gotten quite good at these things. I was basking in what I believed was the presence of God, and doing whatever they said, because hey, this was finally paranormal as hell for me. But there was a lot of deception used in the recruitment process, and it was always nagging at me that I was flat out lying to a lot of people when they asked about who I was and what I did and why I was trying to take them out to a meeting. Then there were the things going on within the group that I didn't feel comfortable with. The older members of the group were manipulating the women. They were allowed back in after about 8 months, and basically setting up arranged relationships between male members or themselves to further control them. People who were clearly paranoid schizophrenics were being taken off of their medications and being praised for being actually sober, as if their taking medications counted as them using drugs or alcohol. Same deal with self-terminating wanting depressed newcomers. There were several self-terminate attempts in my home when there were guys coming off their meds. I got to know the police in my neighborhood as a detox type guy. Halfway houses are very common in the area I was in, so they didn't really think much of some junkies trying to kill themselves or blowing a gasket when they started with the delirium tremens. I was fine up until they kicked Mike out. I was able to look past a lot, but this was just something I couldn't rationalize away. They had done something that went against the core principles of what they claimed to be for, and that opened up the floodgates for the rest of the fault to be found with them. I voiced my opinion of the situation loudly, in front of newcomers, and to multiple people. The next few days at AA involved the most intense rip-downs for me that I've ever seen. There was no putting back together. It was just them attempting to break me down before I could make the decision to leave. One night, after a particularly rough night of AA, I was sitting outside contemplating what to do. I looked at the sky and watched the clouds rolling overhead, and the incredibly clear night sky behind them showcased a star. It appeared to be flashing several colors and hovered and moved. I had seen the exact same star lying in the back seat of the ex-girlfriend's car after one final hookup before I left town. The girl I mentioned at the beginning of this thread. I got the distinct thought, it's calling me home. And I had made my decision. Note, I don't know if this was reality or the effects of my brain operating under extreme duress and trying to rationalize going against years of ritualized conditioning. It isn't verifiable by anyone else, so I guess we may never know. I sold my laptop that day to a pawn shop and got enough cash to buy a plane ticket. Over the next few days at AA, I played it cool and just made all the right noises to avoid rousing suspicion. I told one person about my plans, and that was the only person I thought I could feel safe letting know. He helped me get a suitcase to pack my stuff and gave me a ride to the airport. He was only sober for a few months at the time, and he got out as well. The night before I left, I was so nervous I could feel my skin crawling. I tried to play it cool, but when I spoke to people, I couldn't really look them in the eyes for too long, and the charade was getting hard to maintain. One guy flat out asked me, "Hey, Anon, you planning on going anywhere? I hope not, 'cause I'd miss ya," and just gave me this look. I played it off and got out of there safe. I stayed up that entire night praying. I had never hoped that things would be all right as hard as I did that night. I grabbed my stuff at 4 a.m. and walked outside. I could have cowered out at any moment. I could have lost it at any second and stayed there. I didn't. I made it on the plane and landed in my hometown about 8 hours later, and have been attempting to move on with my life ever since. It's been a little under a year now and things are better than I expected. I still haven't drank. My first few months, however, were plagued with this terrible feeling. It was like I was going against the grain of life. I was doing something wrong, and I was marked for death because I betrayed the group. That faded with the help of good, medication-free therapy. I can rationalize being in a cult. I can rationalize any number of things. I can't rationalize the presence I've experienced and the things I've seen. They tear me apart under the surface every day. I can't move on until I find some answers. That's what this thread is really for. Answers. Psychiatry can attempt to tell me that I was under stress, and I saw things because of that. When two or more people have the same hallucination and corroborate it without any prompting from the other, it stops being a hallucination and starts being objective reality. I know what I saw that night with Mike. I know that Cameron wasn't just a good mentalist. I know what I felt in those one-on-ones was unspeakably powerful and beautiful and horrifying. I made this thread because when I finally made it home, I went to go and be alone and reflect in the woods. I sat and thought and thought and thought and tried to put it into proper terms, but the experience just wouldn't fit. I sat there for hours smoking cigarettes and thinking. Eventually I was crying. I cried until my throat was numb. I couldn't make it fit into my defined worldview, and that was repulsive to me. It occurred to me that this wasn't going to get me anywhere. I sighed, wiped my eyes, and checked my phone. The clock read 7:32. It may have been a coincidence. It may have been a cruel joke from otherworldly beings. It may have been God himself telling me that he was there watching out for me. But it didn't matter. That was it. It was just too much. Too much for one person to handle at one time. I saw that number and I screamed. I screamed and screamed and screamed. Thank God I was pretty deep in the woods and nobody could hear me because I was literally shrieking and on the verge of madness. My mind just couldn't handle any more of that. I ran for what felt like hours until I emerged on the far side of the forest, near a well-lit grocery store. I'm sitting here really thinking about this for the first time since it happened, and I'm feeling that same paralyzing fear in the pit of my stomach, and my heart is beating so fast that I feel like it's hammering out of my chest, and my mind is spinning around like one of those carnival rides, and it's slowly coming off the hinges and I can't stop it. And the only thing I can do is scream because I'm stuck along for the ride. This is really tough for me to even think about. Forgive me, guys. To make a long story short, I told the family I was staying with that I had been involved with a group of radicals in Florida and needed to go see a psychiatrist about it because it was causing me problems. I did. The doc diagnosed me with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from the mind control and watching people seize out and attempt to self-terminate. It explained a lot of the anxiety I'd been having. When I brought up the other stuff, they almost refused to talk about it, as if it was worthless. So I stopped talking about them and kept them to myself. I tried to move on, but things just never go as planned. I've been going day by day, but I wonder sometimes if I'm not just crazy, and another drink has been an answer all along. I just don't know.
So, can you read my mind? Where can I learn more about this stuff? I want to believe, I really do.
I'm telling you guys, the things that I saw was interesting, really it was. It was mind-blowingly amazing. But a destructivist cult experience isn't cool or fun or amazing. It's painful, it's traumatic, it's mentally and emotionally damaging. Not recommended. Trust me.
Then share the technique. How does it work? What did you do to achieve this thoughtless state?
I really shouldn't be doing this. I really don't understand all of this fully. I'm assuming this is interchangeable for whatever. I may be wrong. I don't want this distributed or posted anywhere else. Thanks. This has a cumulative effect. In the morning, before you get up, before you piss, before you smoke, before you do anything, you must do these things. 1. Read. Whatever you wish to read is fine. An esoteric book is recommended. Between 2 paragraphs and 2 pages. No more, no less. Every morning, every night. 2. Prayer. Pray on your knees to whatever you believe in. Establish what you want and ask your deity of choice for it in the morning, and at night thank it. For example, morning. Please protect me from car accidents today. Night. Thank you for protecting me from car accidents today. This actually worked about 80% of the time. I wasn't being a selfish asshole and genuine about praying for what I needed. 3. Quiet time. Morning only. This is difficult, especially if you are a smoker. After you've read and prayed, go outside and find a place where you will not be disturbed. Set an alarm for 5 minutes, no more, no less. Sit down and close your eyes. Begin circular breathing. Once your eyes have closed, no more movement until the alarm goes off. Do not listen to your thoughts. The objective here is to remove yourself as much as possible by focusing on external stimuli. Focus on the noise outside of yourself. Listen to the birds. Now, do you hear the breeze? Hear the dogs and the far-off conversation? How about the cars? Good. Cycle through all the sounds you can hear a few times and then just try and hear everything all at once. And bam! If you do this right, you should feel yourself getting smaller and smaller. Eventually you are erased. And there's nothingness until the alarm goes off, snapping you back to reality, back into your body. Do it every day. See what happens.
What the hell up? Hi, I'm the complete abandoned guy from the previous thread. To recap, I was brought to one of these cult-like meetings in Doraville, Georgia by some guy and can corroborate a lot of the things you described about groups like these. The thing is, this ritual you are describing is very similar to what the guy, Frank was his name, told me to do every morning. He told me to wake up, read 2 pages in my big book, no more, no less, say a prayer that he had written down for me. Can't remember what it is right now. I think it was something along the lines of, allow me to do whatever it takes to stay sober today. And then to meditate for exactly 5 minutes. To sit in complete silence for 5 minutes. That is exactly what he told me to do. God damn, man, is there really something to this?
The user's post from the previous thread.
I'm not done reading. Only read the first few posts. But what you are describing so far sounds a lot like this place near where I live, called Complete Abandon. They pose as an AA group and go to other AA groups and try to recruit people. I have had 2 of these people try and recruit me. The first time, I didn't know better and went there, and it was exactly as you described. Everybody was one-on-one, and I talked to my other AA friends about it, and they told me that the people in Complete Abandon are forced to leave all their friends and go sleep on each other's couches and floors. I was told never to go back there. You're really freaking me out, OP, because so far from what I've read, everything reminds me of that Complete Abandon group that I went to. I cannot corroborate anything that OP said about speaking with someone who seems able to read their mind. The only person I spoke with that night was the person who took me there, who must have been pretty fresh if he was out recruiting people, me. So I cannot back up that story. But I have been approached by other people from that group since then, each one trying to recruit me to come to Complete Abandon. So I can confirm that yes, there are AA groups that behave the way OP described. They force members to cut off all contact with other people, they force members to crash on each other's couches, and they force members to aggressively recruit other alcoholics. It is very scary. I'm sort of intrigued into going back there in order to perhaps experience what OP was describing. Just wanted to point out that people at Complete Abandon would use that word to refer to all the new recruits. They were called pigeons. I really can't believe that some AA group like that would really be capable of such a crazy thing, nor that I would ever see this on /x/. Wow, my mind has been blown tonight.
Up, would you suggest doing this for a random person?
This is the problem with you /x/. You're that curious child who has to play with fire before you find out firsthand it burns. Even if everyone tells you beforehand it will burn you, even if you see it burn something, even if all the signs line up and you know it burns, you have to go out your way to burn yourself because you're born to be that guy. You're just not very bright. To answer your question, Anon, no. OP said the practices as they are were meant to kill the ego, to destroy a sense of self so you become more open to everything outside you. If you don't have the experience of a community cult, who probably at least know what they're doing to some degree, to lean on while they build you back up, you won't last long. As you heard, if you heard, with Mike having a friend there doesn't really help. You just both get messed up. So that's 2 screw-ups for the price of 1. I feel like we all read the story, but I'm the only one who was paying attention. I wonder how many of you have already started doing the ritual without any proper research, prep, or precaution. Can't wait to hear about the sudden bouts of extreme depression across /x/ followed by self-terminate attempts. You know the ones OP warned about earlier happening to some initiates, but no one paid attention because all of you were skimming to find the part about the ritual.
I feel like you probably didn't read closely at all. The self-termination attempts were largely due to alcoholics going cold turkey, depressives, and schizos going off their meds. Then there's the cult itself. They purposely and daily broke him down and rebuilt him. The ritual, of course, is meant to do this too, but a pretty big part of the story was Cameron seeing into people and unnerving them through all he knows and saying it expressly to break a person down. Of course, if you went into the cult, lived what he lived, were around what he was around, it'd be 99.9% likely you'll come out the same and regret it. But we here at /x/, some of us anyways, aren't huge cowards like yourself. I know it's hard to believe people can read creepypasta without crapping themselves or even being entertained, but goddamn, my man, after hearing about the self-masticating polymorph, blah, ain't you curious? Hell, what's a little fire to finding out the world is weird? OP has it real hard right now, but in 5 years, if he's managed to assimilate the experience and come out stronger, he'll be in a place that most of the world doesn't even know exists. He'll be in contact with the other side.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.